Hello, my name is Daniel Alber, and I'd like to formally welcome you to my class, the Art and Science of Cooking. So I want to open by being very honest here. The recipes I'm going to show you, they're not very complicated, and you can definitely find better recipes online. I'm not a 5-star chef. I'm just somebody who likes to cook and likes to eat a little more than that. But I do want to say that I'm going to tell you why you should do the fundamentals a certain way. So if you've learned how to cook from anyone who really likes to do it, or if you've ever watched a cooking class online, they might tell you things that lead to better food, but you don't know why you should do it that way. For example, if you've ever baked before, you might have noticed that they tell you how long to knead the dough for, and that if you over knead the dough, you get bread that's a little different, or maybe if you under knead the dough, you get pizza that doesn't taste as good. And so a lot of these things are taught in really old classes. The French chefs learned these techniques, but the reason they work is really scientific, and I think that makes them cooler. And also it helps you to figure out how to save a dish that's going bad. And so I have a lot of experience with cooking and messing up and forgetting something, and then it's really up to you to figure out how to save that dish if you want to eat something that's tasty. And so knowing the science behind some of what you should do in the fundamentals of cooking really helps you do that. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. Usually the way that this will go is that I'll show the recipe at the beginning, I'll show a cost breakdown, some nutrition facts. I'm not cooking the healthiest food, but it's tasty and it's a lot healthier than eating out. And so I really hope that by learning the basics that I'm going to teach you, you can go out and start cooking your more interesting meals on your own. And the health aspect just comes from making sure that most of what you eat is vegetables and not meat or carbohydrates. And so today's recipe is pasta sauce with meatballs and pasta. So I hope you make a salad on the side. I'll be showing you a little bit of salad recipes in other videos, but today I'm going to leave that up to you. And so what we're going to start out with is our spread, our ingredients. So in every show that you see, they always have everything prepared in these tiny little glass bowls, right? And that's not how it works, at least not in my kitchen. I came home from work today, I'm hungry, I want to start eating, and I got to wash all the dishes. I don't have a dishwasher, I don't know if you can see. I've got to wash every dish I use. So what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you in real time how to actually cook these dishes. You will see me wash dishes. I hope that you will turn this on and cook along with me, as we would if we were in person. And in the downtime when I'm washing dishes, I'll explain a little bit about what I'm doing and why I'm doing what I'm doing, and I hope that's a little interesting to you. But above all, I just want to be very honest with you. This is going to take exactly how long the video is to cook. And I'm starting with the ingredients, I'm not preparing them ahead of time. And so we're going to make pasta sauce with meatballs and some pasta. And so for the sauce, we're going to need some tomatoes, some tomato paste, we're going to need some oregano, some red chili flakes, some salt, some pepper for everything we're doing, a little bit of garlic, a carrot, which I'll talk about later. And then for the meatballs, we'll need some ground beef. If you're vegetarian, you can use a meat substitute. You can add more mushrooms into the sauce. I've cooked with tofu before in the sauce. There's a lot of things you can do. Just make sure that you're getting your protein from other sources. You'll need egg, parsley, Italian parsley, breadcrumbs, and adobo seasoning. I have Goya here, but any adobo style seasoning works, and obviously salt and pepper. And then just the basics, you need a bowl, a cutting board, some measuring spoons, a knife, some measuring cups, and a couple of pans, and some olive oil. And with that, we'll start with the sauce. And so the first thing I'm going to tell you is that the recipe I'm giving you is double what I'm going to make. There's only one of me, and I can eat for 2 people, not 4. So I'll tell you what to add as I'm adding it. I'm adding half of what you'll be adding if you're cooking for 4 people. Can't open it. All right, so what you're going to do is first you're going to take your garlic and you're going to separate out a few cloves. And so I'm going to do 4 cloves of garlic. You can do 8. The more the better. I love garlic, so if anything, use more. And so you're just going to mince this up. And so the reason that you mince garlic, and I'll show you a little trick, just take the bottom, cut the bottom off. So now you have the bottom open. You take your knife, you pound on the garlic, You crush it. Crushing is always good for garlic because you release allicin, which is the flavor molecule in garlic. That's what makes it garlicky. And so once you do that, the garlic literally, you can see it just falls out of the little covering it's in. And so let me clear this so you can see something. This is very real. I'm not going to cut very much out here. So then you have your garlic cloves all peeled, and you really only have to mince them down about as fine as you want to eat them. We're going to add them into the sauce. They're going to cook down, and I like to just crush it and then roughly chop a little bit. But I'm not too precise about this because again, it's going to go into the sauce. It's going to cook down. We're really just mincing it again to release that allicin, which is what I was saying earlier, the flavor molecule. And so here we've got garlic. Again, you see I'm not a professional, but just a quick mince. You don't need anything fancy. Alright, next, I would recommend that you open your cans together. So I'm going to rinse them off because you don't know where these are stored. There might have been like mice running around on top, so I like to rinse my cans. So again, you're going to use 2 of these cans if there are 4 people. I'm going to use just 1 because there's 1 of me. Then I'm going to take a little fork. I'm going to take a little fork and I'm just going to peel this up. Put the tomatoes off to the side with the tomato paste. So you're going to use the entire tin of tomato paste for 4 people. I'm going to use half of it. We're going to brown this. This is super concentrated tomatoes. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take my pot. I'm using one of this size. You can use a Dutch oven if you have it, a heavier pot. And I'm just going to put a little olive oil in there, and I'm going to heat it up until the olive oil is shimmering. And then I'm going to add the garlic. And I like to heat it on medium high. A really high heat is really only for searing things, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Try to stay medium high. And so while that's going, take your carrot and wash it. And actually, you don't have to peel it. We're not going to end up eating this. We're going to add it in for sugar, which I'll talk about. There's the carrot. And go ahead while you're cutting. I like to make use of every moment I have. Take your parsley. Separate out a little bit. So I'm using about this much. That's for 2 portions, so you can use about double. But this is for taste. So this parsley is going to go into the meatballs. So if you're using 2 pounds of ground beef, take about as much parsley as you think you'd want to eat. If you don't know what parsley tastes like, taste it right now after you wash it. It's going to mellow out a little bit in the meatballs, but if you don't like the taste, don't add it. So we're just going to take this, and again, you're just going to fold it in on itself a little bit, and then just go ahead and give it a rough chop. Again, it's going to go into meatballs. You're just chopping kind of thin. Some people don't like the stems. It's all good. It's all food. So there's our parsley. All right, my oil's sizzling. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my garlic, and I'm going to add the garlic into the pot. Now here, make sure that you're not going to burn your garlic, so make sure that your heat isn't super high. You want the garlic to soften a little bit. You don't want it to brown, because we're going to keep cooking it. And so you can see I've got olive oil and garlic in there. Hopefully you can see that. And I'm just going to basically cook it just a little bit. I took it off the heat because it was a little too hot, just until you can kind of smell it. You don't want it to burn or crisp. And so what you're doing is you're infusing the oil that's in the olive oil that's in your pot with garlic flavor. And what that means is that the olive oil is literally dissolving out flavor molecules in the garlic. And so after that's been in there for just a little bit, you're going to take your tomato paste and you're going to add it in. You're going to add the whole can. I'm going to add just half. Crushing garlic releases some enzymes from the cells that convert some molecule called allicin to allicin. Allicin, spelled Allison, is really smelly and gives garlic some of its famous smell. To try this for yourself, crush some garlic and leave it out for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, crush some fresh garlic and compare their smells. Allicin breaks down after 2.5 hours, which is why it's always better to use fresh garlic instead of jarred. But if you're short on time, I won't tell. Now this might seem weird because you're adding a paste into the oil. You're not trying to crisp it or anything, you're actually trying to caramelize the sugars. There are some sugars in the tomato paste. And when you caramelize them, literally like you make caramel out of sugar, it's going to deepen the flavor, it's going to make it a little sweeter. And so you're just trying to basically make this tomato paste a little darker in color. And so it's a little tricky, but you want to keep like mashing it up and stirring it. So whenever it's close, just take it off the heat for a little bit, just to let it sit and the flavors mingle. And next we're going to take our tomatoes that we've opened, and we're going to drain off part of the tomatoes into a little bowl. So you're just going to take the juice and just drain it off. And then you're going to add the tomatoes into a bowl. Like this. Here are the tomatoes. And you're just going to add a little bit of the juice back in. And we're going to save this. So we're going to use this to thin out our sauce if we need to make it any thinner. If you don't end up using it, this is great to drink also. And so you got to get in there with your hands and mash it up. You can use a spoon if you want, but honestly cooking's a lot easier when you use your hands, when you're not afraid to get them a little dirty. I'm wearing an apron, so my shirt should be okay. I've got a towel on the side here, I don't know if you can see. You just rinse your hands off and you keep going, and it's much easier this way. So the tomatoes are going to give off a lot of liquid, which is why we poured off some of the liquid. We don't want our sauce to be too liquidy. And you're just going to mash it up, scrunch up those tomatoes until you have, generally just smaller pieces. And then you're going to wash your hands off. Put the pan back on the heat. And then you're just going to add your tomatoes in. Now, give it a good stir. And what you're trying to do is, when the pan's hot, there might be some browned bits at the bottom from your tomato paste or your garlic that are maybe a little stuck to the bottom of the pan. So with the liquid that you just added, take your spatula and really kind of scrape the bottom and scrape all of it up, and so that it dissolves in your sauce. That's going to make the sauce taste a lot better. This is what's called deglazing the pan. And this idea is used to make a lot of pan sauces, and if you've ever been eating a steak with a nice sauce on it, usually that's a pan sauce. They scrape up all the little brown bits and you get a deeper flavor. So now you've got your sauce in there, so you're just going to let this simmer for a long time, like an hour at least. And so what we're going to do is we're going to lightly season it first. So tomatoes have a lot of acidity. Canned tomatoes have a ton of acidity. There's also sugar in your tomatoes, different amounts of sugar on different brands of canned tomatoes. To cut the acidity, you want to add a little bit of sugar. I don't like adding like sucrose, like the regular table sugar. I like adding sugar through veggies. So carrots have a lot of sugar in them, so you can just take this carrot that you've washed and just toss it straight in. It's going to give off some sugars, it's going to make the sauce a little sweeter. If you end up tasting the sauce and it tastes kind of acidic or acrid, you just want to add more sugar in there. Just going to plop this in. Let it sit in there. And you can do this with a lot of vegetables. I like putting maybe half an onion in there. That also gives it a good flavor. At this point, this is just the base of the sauce. Very simple. I'm only using a few spices. I'm only using oregano and red chili flakes to make it a little spicy with salt and pepper. You can add basil, you can add all kinds of stuff, whatever you like. Italian seasoning is just a combination of oregano, basil, a little bit of other spices in there. So whatever you want. You're just going to bring it up to a simmer, and once it's simmering, you're just going to scrape the bottom of the pan, then you're going to cover it, and you're just going to let that cook. And so I'm going to very, very lightly season it with oregano and red chili flakes. And I'm going to lightly season it with salt, because there's already salt in canned tomatoes, and pepper. When you salt your sauce, under-salt the sauce right now. Don't add too much salt, because water's going to cook off, and your sauce is going to get more concentrated. So if you add salt now to make it taste perfect, there's going to be a bunch of water that escapes later, and it's going to taste too salty. So really do most of your seasoning, especially with salt at the end, specifically for sauces. After you season, try the sauce and try to remember what it tastes like, because you're going to try it again in an hour, and you're going to see why we cook a sauce for an hour. So I'm going to just season.
Now let's talk about why it's important to have some fat in most dishes that you cook. You've probably seen that oil and water don't mix. What you might not know is that most molecules will dissolve either in oil or water, but usually not both. For example, salt dissolves really easily in water, but it won't dissolve in oil at all. Try it out for yourself. Put a little bit of salt in some oil and a little bit of salt in some water and shake them. You'll see that the salt won't dissolve in the oil. Similarly, a lot of spices and vitamins will only dissolve in fats, but won't dissolve in water. If you don't cook with any oil or fat, these flavor molecules and vitamins won't make it into your dish. Your dish won't taste as good, and it probably won't be as healthy. Now let's talk about salting your soups and your sauces. When you taste food, you end up mostly tasting the concentration of flavor instead of the amount. For example, when you think something is salty, you are really tasting that there is a lot of salt per volume of food. When we boil or simmer anything with liquid, the steam is some of that liquid escaping. If we put some salt in a pot of water and then boiled that water until there was barely any left, the leftover liquid would be very salty because the water boiled off, but the salt did not.
If you feel like your sauce is a little too thick, I'm going to add a little more of the juice to thin it out a little bit. And you're going to cover and cook. Alright, up next we're going to do meatballs while those are cooking. So again, I'm a very practical person. I actually come home from work and I cook for myself, so I don't like using too many dishes. So you can just use the same bowl. You can rinse it out if you want. Honestly, you can leave the tomatoes in. It's meatball, it's going to go in the sauce. It's going to be fine if it tastes like tomatoes. I'm just going to rinse this out and we'll do everything in here. Alright, so we have our parsley that we already minced up, or chopped up. You're going to take 2 eggs. I'm using 1 because I'm doing half a portion. I'm going to drop the egg in there. And then you're going to add, you should add 1.5 tablespoons of the seasoning. I'm adding 3/4 of a tablespoon. Again, I'm not really measuring too much, because I made it before. But you might want to measure the first time. Add a healthy, some pepper, some breadcrumbs. So if you're using your own bread, I use my own bread here because I had some laying around. You want 2 slices per pound of ground beef. So I have a pound of ground beef I'm going to make. I'm going to use 2 slices of bread. If you're making for 4 people, that's 2 pounds of ground beef. And it's a little gross, I guess, but once you see what it turns into when you cook it, I don't think it's very gross anymore. So now you have this giant meatball. Now I'm going to give you a tip. If you want your stuff to finish cooking faster, make smaller meatballs. I love these huge meatballs, you know, that you get like Wawa style meatballs, maybe like a restaurant meatballs, but if you want your things to cook quicker, you got to make the meatballs smaller. So while my oil is cooking, it's about ready now, we're just going to make little meatballs. So I'm just pinching off the little meatball. There, that is the absolute biggest you'd ever want to go. If you want them to cook faster, go about that big. I'm going to add it into the pan. So a little trick you can do here, I've made this before so I know it's going to be okay. If you want to see if you season these right, take a little bit of the meat off, microwave it for a few minutes, not a few minutes, microwave it for like 20 seconds and try it, and then you can taste how it would taste when it's cooked. So you can adjust the seasoning that way. And again, like, you know, add as much parsley as you want. If you don't like parsley, don't add it. It's really up to you what you do here. I'm just giving you the guidelines. So we're going to put these on and we're going to brown them in the pan. And I'm going to try to show you what I mean by that.
Now I'm going to talk about one of the most important chemical reactions in all of food science, called the Maillard reaction. This reaction happens in any food with protein and sugar, so most food, when it's heated up between 140 to 165 degrees Celsius. It converts not one, but hundreds of flavor molecules to other flavor molecules, almost like a magic wand. You can even see it happen because it often turns foods brown. For example, when you sear some meat, the brown crust that forms where the meat meets the pan is because of the Maillard reaction. Same thing for the brown bits of potatoes in French fries, and why cookies turn darker brown in the oven. You can even speed up this reaction by using some chemicals such as lye, which is how traditional pretzels get such a dark brown color. This reaction is not the same as caramelization, which is what happens when sugar is heated up and turns brown. This also happens in cookies. Confusing, I know. Caramelization happens to just sugar. For example, if you try putting sugar in the pan by itself, you will be able to make caramel and it'll turn a darker brown. But it's different from the Maillard reaction because it only happens to sugar, no protein at all.
And so you might have noticed that I only put in about half the mixture into the pan. Cook in small batches. If you put too many meatballs in the pan all at once, you're going to get steaming instead of browning. You really want to heat these meatballs up on pretty high heat. I'm at medium high. And you want to brown the bottoms and crisp them up. If you see water in the pan from the meat, that means you got too many meatballs in. So I'm going to cook them batch by batch, and I'm going to add them directly into the sauce. I'm not trying to cook the meatballs all the way through, they'll cook in the sauce. I'm just trying to get them browned, and that's going to improve their flavor. Alright, now while that's going, take a little more parsley. So this is if you like parsley. Just take a little more. And I do. And this is going to go into your sauce at the very end. So just chop up a little bit. You can use it as garnish. Again, to taste. Taste it. If you like it, add more. There's our parsley. And we'll chop this up a little finer since we might be using it for garnish. So those meatballs are going to cook in the sauce, and so they're going to exchange flavors. It's going to deepen the complexity. It's going to taste great in my opinion. Alright, so now the sauce is just cooking. You'll want to cook the meatballs in the sauce for at least 20 or 30 minutes to make sure that they cook all the way through. If you're ever in doubt, just take a meatball out, cut through it, and see if it's raw in the middle. I would also suggest that you cook your sauce as long as possible. A lot of recipes will actually slow cook a sauce overnight in the oven. You can cook a sauce for hours and hours and hours, the flavor only gets better, and sauce is one of those things where you leave it in the fridge and the next day you heat it up and it tastes even better. That's because the flavors have more time to mix with each other. When you cook it for a long time, you get more of a roastier flavor. You cook your ingredients more, and so the flavor really changes. So once you add the meatballs in, don't eat that sauce for another 20 minutes. Let it cook so that you don't get any bacteria. But after about 20 minutes, go ahead and try the sauce again and compare with what it tasted like at the beginning. And you should notice that the flavors changed even though you haven't been adding a lot of different spices. And so at this point, you can eat whatever you want. About 10 minutes before you're ready to eat, cook your pasta, plate up your pasta, put your meatballs and your sauce on. Season your sauce taste it right before you serve it to people. And then at the end, I just put in parsley. I don't cook it with the parsley. The parsley gets kind of gross if you keep cooking it. At the very end, I stir in the parsley, and then I might garnish with a little bit of this parsley on top, just because I love parsley. In terms of this right here, if you keep cooking your sauce and you find that your sauce gets way too thick, you should add this tomato juice. If you run out of tomato juice, which is fine as you keep cooking, the water's going to evaporate, the flavor only gets better. If you run out of your tomato juice, the next best thing to use is actually pasta water. Make your pasta in salty water. After you finish cooking your pasta, just take that water and use it. And then if all else fails, just regular water is also always fine. Again, what's going to actually evaporate from the sauce is just regular water. You can replace it with regular water. It's not going to taste any different. That's just, it's a little more tomato. And I actually leave the sauce on the burner on simmering while I'm eating. I like to cook my sauce as long as I possibly can. And this is a great meal to prepare ahead of time, to eat through the week. The only thing that might be a little tricky to reheat is the pasta itself. But if you're like me and you work, I take the sauce and I freeze it in my freezer. And then if I come home and I'm tired, it's a lot faster to just cook some pasta really quickly and then thaw out my sauce in the microwave and add it on than it would be to drive somewhere and get food, or even to get on an app and order delivery. So I hope that this was a little helpful for you. I hope that the science was a little interesting. It's my first episode. If you made it this far, thank you.